What his cancer diagnosis changed forever. He built a beef business worth millions. He beat the supermarkets. He beat the council. He beat every expert who said a farm this small could never turn a profit. And then, in the final minutes of his own television show, Jeremy Clarkson looked at the camera and said 4 words nobody was ready for. "I've got cancer." Not a headline, not a press release. Said out loud in a hospital bed to the 2 people who'd spent 5 years building an empire with him. And what happened next, the decisions he made in the weeks after, that's the part almost nobody is talking about. Because that diagnosis didn't just change his health, it changed the entire future of Diddley Squat. Before we get into this, because it gets heavier the deeper we go, if you're new here, this channel breaks down the real business and personal story behind Clarkson's farm. Not the show version, the version buried in interviews, planning documents, and the things he's only said once and never repeated. Hit subscribe now because in about 4 minutes, I'm going to show you the exact moment, the exact sentence, where Clarkson quietly told the world he was done expanding. Most viewers missed it completely. You won't if you stick around. Now, let's go back to where this really starts. For 5 years, the story of Diddley Squat was always the same shape. Something breaks. Clarkson refuses to quit. He wins anyway. The council shut his restaurant. He opened a pub instead. Bovine TB wiped out his herd. He rebuilt with different livestock. The weather destroyed a harvest. He diversified into beer, into lamb, into anything that would keep the farm alive. Every single time, the pattern was expansion. More land, more products, more risk, more ambition. That was the entire engine of the show, and the entire engine of his business. But somewhere around 2024, that pattern started to break, and almost nobody clocked it while it was happening, because it didn't look like a crisis. It looked like caution. October 2024. Clarkson is on holiday in the Indian Ocean, and something is wrong. He can't swim properly. He can barely get up a flight of stairs without holding on to someone. He comes home, doctors find blocked arteries. He has 2 stents fitted in an emergency heart procedure. Now, here's what most farming channels never mention. That scare came at almost the exact same moment he was opening the farmer's dog, the pub he'd call his biggest, most ambitious project yet. And what did he say about it publicly, almost immediately? He called it his final business venture. Read that again, not the next chapter, not phase 2, final. At the exact moment his body was sending him its first real warning. The man who never stopped expanding used the word final for the first time in 5 years. Nobody thought much of it at the time. It sounded like a joke. It wasn't. By 2025, Clarkson himself was describing it as the darkest year yet at Diddley Squat. Bovine TB forced brutal decisions about the herd. The business he'd spent years building was absorbing hit after hit. And this time, he wasn't opening anything new to offset it. He was holding the line on what already existed. That's the tension nobody explains properly. A man whose entire brand for 5 straight years was build something new when things go wrong, suddenly stopped building. And then came June 2026, the final episodes of season 5. The moment everything people had half noticed. The word final, the pause, the caution, suddenly made complete sense. If you're still here, this is where it gets real, and I don't want you to miss the next part. Because after this, I'm going to walk you through exactly what he said, what it meant for the farm, and the one decision afterward that tells you everything about where Diddley Squat goes from here. Tap subscribe if you haven't already. It genuinely helps this channel keep covering the real story behind the show instead of the polished version everyone else recycles. Okay, here's what actually happened in the closing episodes of season 5. During what looks like an ordinary conversation about harvest planning, Clarkson turns to farm manager Caleb Cooper and land agent Charlie Ireland and says it plainly. I've got cancer. Caleb's reaction is instant disbelief. No, you haven't. Clarkson doesn't soften it. He explains he disappeared from the farm for a stretch not long before, something viewers had noticed but never had an explanation for, because he'd gone for a biopsy. The diagnosis, an aggressive form of prostate cancer, but caught early. He tells them he'll need an operation. That the procedure itself is quick, but that his body will be out of action for a while. And then, almost as an afterthought, he adds the line that should stop you in your tracks if you followed this show from the start. We started season 5 with me in a hospital bed, and here we are at the end of season 5, and I'm back in a hospital bed. Think about what that sentence is actually doing. It's not just narrating a health update. It's a man quietly acknowledging that an entire year of his life, a A year that used to be measured in harvests and new ventures was instead bookended by hospitals. That's not a farming story anymore. That's a man doing the arithmetic on his own mortality live in front of millions of viewers. Here's what a lot of coverage got wrong in the days after this aired. They treated it like any other celebrity health scare. Shock, sympathy, moving on. But if you actually track Clarkson's history, this diagnosis landed on top of a body that had already been sending signals for years. The heart procedure in 2024, the stents, the moment on holiday when a man once famous for driving supercars at 200 miles an hour couldn't climb a staircase without help. Even earlier than that, a decade earlier, Clarkson had once described a different scare, a lump that his doctor warned sternly was probably cancer. That was back in 2015, in the days right before the infamous incident that got him dropped from his biggest show at the time. He got the all clear then, but he's talked since about how that fear, the genuine belief he might be dying, shaped how he handled that entire period of his life. So this wasn't his first brush with the word cancer. It was the moment the odds finally caught up with him, and there's one more detail that made this diagnosis land even harder on a personal level. Gerald Cooper, the farm's beloved dry stone waller, one of the most recognizable faces on the entire show, had been diagnosed with prostate cancer himself just seasons earlier. Viewers watched Gerald go through treatment, watched him improve, watched the farm celebrate when he was declared cancer-free. Now Clarkson was living the exact same diagnosis on the exact same farm in front of the exact same cameras. That's not coincidence for the story. That's the story circling back on the man who built it. Then comes the sentence that should be the headline of every article written about this, and somehow wasn't. Speaking from his hospital bed, reflecting on what comes next for the show and the farm, Clarkson says, "If this is all successful, I'll see you for season 6, and if it isn't, I won't." Sit with that for a second. This is a man who has spent his entire career being the loudest, most defiant voice in the room, someone who built a business empire out of pure stubbornness, who turned council rejections into storylines, who turned bankruptcy-level farming numbers into a global hit show. And here he is for the first time admitting out loud that the future isn't guaranteed. Not the future of the farm, not the future of the pub, not his own future. That's the real turning point, not the diagnosis itself. The moment he stopped talking about diddly squat like an empire he was building and started talking about it like something he might be handing over. So let's answer the question in the title directly, because I promised you I would, and I'm not going to string you along for 20 minutes without delivering it. Did Clarkson literally announce he was ending all expansion at diddly squat? No, there's no press release that says that. But look at the pattern again, now that you have the full picture. The pub, his most ambitious project yet, was branded by his own words as his final venture months before the diagnosis was public. The following year was branded by his own words as the darkest yet, and the closing message of the season that revealed his cancer wasn't a promise of what's coming next. It was a conditional. If this works, there's a season 6. If it doesn't, there isn't. Compare that to every other turning point in the show's history. When the restaurant got shut down, his response was immediate. Buy a pub. When disease wiped out the herd, his response was immediate. Restock, diversify, push forward. Setbacks used to be met with new ventures within a single season. This time, the response to the biggest setback of his life wasn't a new venture. It was silence, a pause, a conditional sentence about whether there'd even be a next season at all. That's the shift, not a headline, a pattern breaking in real time for anyone paying close enough attention to see it. Here's the part that gives this story its ending, at least for now. Clarkson later confirmed he is in remission. A follow-up test showed no sign of the cancer remaining. He described himself in his own words as the world's luckiest man. That's genuinely good news, and it deserves to be said plainly, without a manufactured twist to keep you watching. The man got the outcome everyone was hoping for, but here's what remission doesn't erase: the fear that produced that conditional sentence. If this works, there's a season 6. Doesn't just switch off because the follow-up scan comes back clear. Anyone who has been through a serious health scare or watched someone close to them go through one knows that. The relief is real, but so is the recalibration underneath it. A man who spent 5 years building outward, more land, more livestock, more risk, risk, has now spent back-to-back years learning in the most direct way possible that his own body has limits he cannot out-stubborn his way past. That doesn't mean diddly squat is finished. It very likely isn't, but it does mean the why behind future decisions has permanently changed. Every expansion from here forward will be filtered through a question that never used to exist in Clarkson's vocabulary. Is this worth what it might cost me? There's a reason this story has resonance far outside anyone who cares about British farming, and it's worth pausing on before we go further. Clarkson has said in his own writing that he's lost too many friends to prostate cancer, and that it pushed him to start paying for regular private checkups years before this diagnosis. That habit, routine testing, not waiting for symptoms, is almost certainly the reason doctors caught this aggressive cancer at a stage where surgery could still fully resolve it. Prostate cancer is famous for exactly this problem. It often produces no obvious symptoms until it has already spread. The only way to catch it early is to actually go and get tested before anything feels wrong. Clarkson getting tested wasn't a plot point on a TV show. It was an ordinary, quietly boring health decision made years earlier, and the kind nobody puts in a highlight reel. And it is very plausibly the single reason he's alive and in remission today, instead of facing a far worse outcome. That's the part of this story that isn't really about diddly squat at all. It's a real demonstration, playing out in front of millions of viewers, of exactly why early testing matters. Because by the time symptoms show up, the window to catch it easily can already be gone. So where does that leave diddly squat now? The farm shop is still open, the pub is still running, season 5 has aired, and by his own conditional promise, a season 6 depends on how the recovery goes. Which, based on the remission update, looks like it's heading in the right direction. But don't expect the next chapter of this story to look like the last 5 years. The entire identity of the show used to be built on escalation. New animals, new buildings, new fights with the council, new revenue streams every single season. That was the engine. What's far more likely now is a period of consolidation, protecting what already exists. The shop, the pub, the brand, Hawkstone, rather than chasing the next big swing. Not because the ambition is gone, because for the first time in this entire saga, Clarkson has direct personal evidence of what unchecked expansion costs a body that isn't as invincible as 5 years of television made it look. It's worth stepping back to notice something else about how this story landed. This wasn't just a celebrity health update. It became, almost overnight, a genuinely national moment. People who'd never watched a single episode of Clarkson's Farm were suddenly talking about prostate checks. Men who'd been putting off a doctor's appointment for years were posting about booking one. There's even a runner, a man named Andrew Hood, who credits an entirely different Clarkson show, The Grand Tour, with prompting him to get checked for testicular cancer back in 2021, a decision he says saved his life. He later ran an ultramarathon ending at Diddly Squat Farm specifically to thank Clarkson for it. That's the strange, almost accidental power of this story. A man who spent decades being famous for driving fast and saying provocative things on television has, without ever intending to, become one of the most effective advocates for early cancer screening in the country, not through a campaign. Through being honest, on camera, about something terrifying happening to his own body. Here's the detail that ties this entire story together, and it's the one I promised you at the start. Go back and watch the moment Clarkson first calls the pub his final business venture. At the time, it read as a throwaway line, the kind of thing anyone might say about any project. Ambitious people call things the last one all the time, and then start a new one within a year. But line it up against the timeline. That comment came right around the same window as his heart procedure. The first real signal that his body was no longer cooperating with the pace he'd set for it. Then came the year he himself called the darkest yet. Then came the diagnosis. Then came the conditional sentence about whether there'd even be a season 6. 4 separate moments across roughly 2 years, all pointing in the exact same direction. Not one dramatic announcement. A slow, consistent pattern of a man quietly preparing for the possibility that his time and his energy were no longer unlimited resources. Nobody built a headline out of that pattern while it was happening, because each piece looked small on its own. Put together, it's the real answer to the question in this video's title. If there's one thing to take from this story beyond the fate of a farm in Oxfordshire, it's this. The biggest turning points in someone's life rarely arrive as one clean announcement. They arrive as a pattern. A word used differently, a project quietly labeled final, a year privately called the darkest yet, long before the full picture becomes public. Clarkson spent 5 years building a story about a man who refuses to stop expanding no matter what gets thrown at him. And in the end, the most powerful chapter of that story wasn't about expansion at all. It was about a man forced for the first time to measure his ambition against his own mortality, and choosing, at least for now, to protect what he'd already built rather than keep chasing what came next. That's not weakness. If anything, it might be the most honest thing he's ever put on camera. So to bring it back to where we started, did a cancer diagnosis stop Jeremy Clarkson from expanding diddly squat? Not officially, not with a press release, but the evidence laid out in his own words across 2 years points to something real happening underneath the surface. A shift from a man building an empire to a man protecting one. He's in remission, the farm is still standing, the pub is still full, and by his own account, whether there's a season 6 depends on how the recovery continues to go. If you want to understand where this story goes next, what a consolidation era at diddly squat could actually look like, and what it means for the future of the show, that's exactly what I'm covering in the next video. If this kept you watching until now, do me one favor, hit subscribe, because this channel is entirely built around finding the parts of this story that get buried under the headlines. That's it for this one. I'll see you in the next video.